Welcome back to Fund Your Future with DRS. Today, we're talking about kind of a new-ish type of savings plan for individuals with disabilities and their families called an ABLE savings plan. And it allows folks with disabilities to put away money without worrying about losing some of those disability benefits. So we're happy to have Katie on the program today. She's the program manager for the Washington State Department of Commerce to help us learn more about these accounts. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm excited to be here to share about ABLE, the ABLE Savings Plan. It's one of two financial tools that I oversee that is administered by the state of Washington. The other one is the Developmental Disabilities Endowment Trust Fund, or DDETF for short. But they're both great tools. And yes, I'm happy to share more about them.
Perfect.
Wonderful, Katie. I was at a conference about retirement plans a couple of months ago, which sounds really exciting. I know I'm sure people wish they were there. But somebody I was sitting with started to tell me about ABLE plans. We were talking about 529 plans, and I think he said he had his son with autism. He had just learned about these plans, and he works in the financial industry. And so we're hoping you could just tell us a little bit about what an ABLE account is and what are the primary benefits.
Yeah, so an ABLE account, it's a tax advantaged. It's both a savings and an investment account because we have several options that people can choose from. But essentially, it allows people who are living with disabilities to save money, for either current or future expenses and not be concerned with the asset limits that are set on many state or federal benefit programs. It eliminates the need for people to spend down their money each year or each month when they have too much money in assets. They have to kind of spend it down. But if it's in the ABLE account, they don't have to worry about spending that down. And ABLE was kind of made possible through a federal act that was passed in December of 2014. So we're coming up on our 10-year anniversary here. In Washington, ABLE started, we kind of launched our program in 2018. And since then, we've got about 5,200 account owners in Washington that have saved more than $55 million in their ABLE accounts. So it is an amazing tool that is working for a lot of people.
That's so cool. You kind of talked about how it doesn't affect people who have state or federal benefits. What are some of those common programs where maybe an ABLE account could help those folks?
Yeah, so I would say the most common type of account or benefit that people are receiving is Supplemental Security Income, or SSI as it's commonly referred to. And again, that's the one benefit that has that $2,000 asset limit that really makes it difficult for people to save money, from month to month. So that's the most common one. Some other common ones are Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, otherwise known as SNAP. Also Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or TANF is the acronym for that one. Or Section 8 housing, people who are receiving vouchers, there's kind of asset limits set on their eligibility to receive those as well. People who receive SSDI, those don't have assets, but a lot of people who have ABLE accounts also have SSDI, so it's another benefit that people may receive. Most of the ones I've listed so far have asset limits, but not income limits. So those are two different eligibility requirements. But another common type of benefit that people receive is Medicaid. It has income limits, but not asset limits. So it's another thing that people are concerned about when they're looking at whether or not they want to have an ABLE account. But those are kind of a handful of them. There's a lot more out there, but those are kind of the big ones.
Yeah, that's good to know.
So, Katie, could you tell us who would be or might be eligible for these ABLE accounts?
Yeah, so the eligibility criteria is primarily based on age and disability. So the age criteria is that the onset of the disability had to have started before the age of 26, and that could be for disability or blindness. So that's the first criteria, before the age of 26. The second criteria is that they either have to be eligible for SSI or SSDI, and keynote that I said eligible for, because they don't have to be currently receiving those benefits, just eligible for that. They meet the eligibility criteria for those benefits. Or they could have a disability diagnosis from a physician or psychiatrist. I say physician or psychiatrist because ABLE's really open to a broad range of disability categories. So it could be developmental, mental, like mental health disabilities. So as long as they have one of those two, eligibility or disability diagnosis. I will note that the age of onset is increasing to age 46 starting in January of 2026. So that's really going to open the door to a lot more people who have disabilities that started between age 26 and 45. And another note I'll add here is that you do not have to be under age 26 to open an account. So we have people who are in their 90s who have ABLE accounts, as long as you have documented that your diagnosis began before age 26, you can open it at any age.
That's great. You kind of touched on this a little bit, but can you talk a little bit more about who can open an ABLE account, like between dependents and parents and things like that?
Yeah. So if the person who has the disability, we call that person the beneficiary or the account owner, if they are able to manage the account on their own, then they can open the account on their own behalf. Of course, we have a lot of parents who open accounts for their minor children, and of course the children can open on the account on their own. And we have some people who either aren't able to manage their finances on their own, or they just prefer that somebody else manage them for them. So in those cases, they can have a third party open the account and kind of be the authorized representative on the account. So for the most part, we have parents or spouses, other family members or friends that are managing accounts for the beneficiary. But we have other people might have a more formal or legal relationship with the beneficiary. So power of attorney, a conservator, a guardian, or even a representative payee assigned by the Social Security Administration. Those people can also open an account on behalf of the beneficiary. And we even have organization accounts that, if an organization is managing accounts for multiple beneficiaries, they can open one at an organization level.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
So I think we know with all sorts of different types of retirement accounts, there's oftentimes contribution limits, annual limits, or other types of restrictions on these accounts. So for ABLE accounts, is there an annual contribution limit? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so ABLE accounts have contribution limits that are kind of set based on federal levels. And they change from year to year. So for 2025, the annual contribution limit is $19,000. For people who are just learning about this, you might have heard about in 2024, it was $18,000. So that's going to go up for 2025. And then we also have an additional contribution for people who are employed beneficiaries who are employed and earning their own income. We have a separate contribution limit that is applicable to those employment earnings. And that's called able to work, is the kind of designation that we put towards those contributions. And that limit is an additional $15,000 or up to an additional $15,060 for 2025. So what that means is when you combine those two limits, so an employed beneficiary who has their own account, they could contribute up to $34,060 in 2025, which is significantly higher than $2,000 asset limit, right? So those are contribution limits. There's also kind of like a lifetime balance limit, which is $500,000. So anytime the balance gets to that point, beneficiaries, account owners, they can't contribute to the account anymore. But if they withdraw money or, some money comes out in any other ways and the balance drops down below $500,000, then they can continue making contributions. But those are the primary limits on the account.
And just to clarify, so if the account reaches $500,000 and goes over because of investment gains, so we have a crazy year in the market and it goes up to $600,000, the account holder doesn't have to spend that money down within the year. They just can't continue to contribute to it until it falls below that.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, correct. And thanks for making that distinction. The account can continue to earn interest and other earnings for their investments. They just can't make those contributions until it drops back down.
That makes sense.
Great question.
And before we get into talking about how people use the money, can you tell us a little bit about how people can contribute and put money into the account?
Yeah, a lot of people kind of have questions about the inner workings of like, well, how does it work? We are all online. There's no bank, there's no physical bank that you walk into to manage your account. It's all done online. There's several ways you can make contributions. Keep in mind what I'm about to highlight, the same annual contribution limit applies to all of these. So it's still the $19,000 for 2025. But I'd say there's kind of 4 common ways for people to contribute to their account. The most common way is to connect an external bank account. So wherever you currently have a checking or savings account, you can just connect that to your ABLE account and transfer money, make contributions to your account that way. You can also connect multiple bank accounts. So again, in the case of a parent who might be managing it for a child, whether that child's an adult or not, you can attach, multiple accounts. A second common way to make contributions is to do rollovers. And I'll specify rollovers from other 529 accounts. And this will get a little bit deeper into the tax code here. So an ABLE account is considered a 529A account. You've probably heard of 529 in the world of like college savings, but they both fall under the same tax code, which allows for rollovers from any 529 account to roll into an ABLE account. So what that means is if they have another ABLE account from maybe they lived in another state and they moved to Washington, they can roll that account from that other state into that other ABLE account into a Washington ABLE account. Or if they have a 529 college savings account, they can roll over money from that 529 college savings account into their ABLE account. So that's the second way to make a contribution is through a rollover. A third common way is through gift contributions. So once an account is set up, the account owner goes onto their online platform. They set up a gifting page. They can share that link with friends and family, and contributions can be made that way. And then a fourth way is through a direct deposit. And this can be done either directly from like Social Security Administration. They allow direct deposits into ABLE accounts, or from income, like employment earnings. And that could be the beneficiary's own employment earnings, or it could be like a parent's employment earnings that they want to direct deposit into their child's account or something, for example.
Gotcha. And just to clarify, which one is probably the most common?
I would say the most common currently is through an external bank account. So a lot of people managing their own accounts. And of course, it depends on the relationship that the authorized representative has with the beneficiary. So, for example, if that relationship is a representative payee, they're working directly with, Social Security Administration, it may be a direct deposit from SSA. But yeah, right now we've got a lot of people either managing their own accounts or like parents managing for their children. And so external bank accounts, kind of that common way of making contributions.
Gotcha.
So can you tell us how a person then eventually the money's gone into the account, how are they able to make withdrawals from the ABLE account?
Yeah, I love this because it's really more than just a retirement savings account. It's like you can use the money right away.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So withdrawals are somewhat similar to contributions. So again, the most common way for people to make withdrawals is to then just transfer the money back over to their regular bank account, and then they can, make purchases that way. A second way, and this is kind of my preferred method, I have an ABLE account for one of my kiddos and the debit cards. We have a prepaid debit card. It is an add-on to the ABLE account. It doesn't come standard, but it makes it really easy for you to basically take money out of your account and use it. So that's another withdrawal that people can make, is kind of transferring money from their ABLE account onto the prepaid card. And then there's some other ways like EFT payments, ACH payments, or, even good old paper checks. Some people want to actually send a paper check to a payee or something, and that's another way that they can make withdrawals.
And on your website, it talks about being able to use this money for a qualified disability expense, but it's really a broad term, right? They can also use it for housing or rent. And can you talk a little bit more about what constitutes as a qualified disability expense?
Yes, and that is one of those technical terms that was developed. It's got an acronym, a QDE. So that was basically a broad range of categories created by the IRS for people to, kind of make the determination of whether or not they're using their funds appropriately. And, the easy way to say it is that as long as the funds are being used to improve health, independence, and quality of life, then it's considered a qualified disability expense. And we have some people who still have questions about that. So there's 10 categories. I'll list those off, but they are listed on the website as well. So it makes it easier to see it that way. But those categories are basic living, housing, transportation, education, assistive technology, employment and training, personal support services, legal and funeral costs, health and wellness, and financial management. So if in your head you're wondering, does this qualify? If you can put it into one of those categories, and if it contributes to the quality of life, then yes. So again, they're meant to be broad categories. They're really meant for either the beneficiary or the representative of the account to make the determination of kind of where it fits in. And our recommendation is just keep receipts for anything that you might have a question about or doubts about. One of the most common questions we get is, can I go on a vacation, right? And if you think about it, you're maybe getting airfare, which is transportation. You might need to get a hotel room or some sort of accommodations falls under the, housing. Getting food or paying for experiences throughout the day might be some of those basic, living costs. So for the most part, you can use an ABLE account for pretty much anything that you would use a regular checking account for.
That's super great.
Another thing I wanted to add here, because I know a lot of people have concerns about whether or not they, these accounts are closely monitored, if they're going to get in trouble for using them incorrectly. These accounts were set up for people with disabilities to have a little bit more freedom and quality of life. So at the moment, as far as we're aware, neither the IRS or the Social Security Administration are closely monitoring these accounts. They really are meant to work in the benefit of the beneficiary. So peace of mind there.
Yeah, that's great. And you mentioned kind of one of the ways that the accounts can be made a little bit easier with these prepaid debit cards as an add-on to the plan. I think I saw on your website that there's maybe a fee associated with that. If you could talk a little bit about what that fee is and other benefits of a prepaid card.
Yeah. So the prepaid card has a monthly fee of $5, but currently the Washington ABLE plan is covering a majority of that for account holders. And the other benefit of the prepaid card is there's no transaction fees. There's kind of similar cards out there that do have transaction fees. We have no transaction fees. And the funds on the card are FDIC insured, so people can have peace of mind there. You can load anywhere from $10 all the way up to $20,000 onto a prepaid card. And one account can have multiple cards. So where that comes in handy is when you have, again, like a parent or a guardian who wants to provide a card to their child or to the adult beneficiary to go out and have, some spending money to spend or go hang out with friends, do things like that. But then they might have another card where they're doing things like paying bills or making larger purchases on behalf of the beneficiary. So the card is nice in that way. Another great bonus for the card is that it will track all those transactions online. So for a family, for instance, that might have a child with a disability, but they also have other regular household expenses that they're paying for out of their regular bank account, having that prepaid card allows you to kind of keep all the disability expenses separate from other household expenses so that they're easier to report on or, just track for purposes of reporting.
So you did mention that there is this small nominal fee for the prepaid debit card, but are there any other fees that are associated with the ABLE account that people should be aware of?
Yeah, I think for the most part, we try to keep fees as minimal as possible. But there are a couple fees that apply to everyone who has an ABLE account, one of which is the annual maintenance fee. That is currently $35, and it's assessed quarterly. So people will see it kind of come off of their quarterly statement. And then the other kind of primary account fee, if people are using any of the investment options, is there are investment fees, and those range between 0.3% to 0.38%, depending on the type of investment that the person might choose. Otherwise, we try to keep them low. There's some other fees on the account, like for instance, if people want to receive their documents via paper instead of electronic delivery, I think that's $20 a year. Again, assessed quarterly, so you'll see like a $5 fee on your statement. We have a very small amount of people who utilize that option, maybe like 5 to 7% of our account holders do that. But and there's some other fees that are on, for, again, ordering a paper check or things like that. Those are all detailed in our plan disclosure booklet, but most of the fees we try to keep low.
And Katie, you just mentioned that there is an investment option with this plan. And you mentioned earlier that this is an interesting account and that it works as a saving, spending, and or investment vehicle. So could you just talk about how the investment portion works?
Yeah, so there's 4 options. When a person first opens an account, they can kind of say up front, this is how I want any money that I contribute to the account, how I want it to be allocated. And they've got 4 options. So one of those is kind of like a straight cash option. So think of it like a regular savings account that you might have that it earns interest. It's FDIC insured. But then the other 3 are those investment options, and they're called conservative, moderate, and aggressive. So those utilize the same set of 7 mutual funds, but there's different ratios of stocks and bonds. Again, they're kind of like traditional investment accounts, but they're designed to allow account holders to invest based on their own personal comfort level. Again, think of conservative, moderate, aggressive, people who, maybe want to earn more money and aren't planning on looking at their account or taking any money out of their account for a long time might choose aggressive because it's got a higher rate of return, but it also has that higher level of risk. So yeah, and then there's a link down in the footer of our website that says historical performance. And so people really are interested in this piece. They can kind of look at that and see how those 4 options have performed since our inception.
And I read on your website that having more than $100,000 in an ABLE account could impact your Social Security income. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so this is, I guess, another limit that I didn't mention earlier. Once an account balance reaches $100,000, anything over that is considered an asset for SSI. So imagine, you're receiving SSI and your balance reaches $103,000. So that $3,000 would then count as an asset, and Social Security Administration would start to look at your assets in that way. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that benefits aren't necessarily terminated. They're just suspended until that balance drops back down below $100,000. And this really only applies to people who are getting SSI. So, if you're getting other kind of benefits where that asset limit doesn't apply, then it's not something to be concerned about.
And so do people who are receiving SSI or SSDI need to report their ABLE accounts then to the Social Security Administration?
No, and this is actually something because, the people who are, at that national level of ABLE, they have direct relationships with SSI. It's one of the requirements that we had to have, that we actually report to the Social Security Administration on a monthly basis certain information about each ABLE account. To ensure things like that there's one account per beneficiary and that contribution limits aren't being exceeded. And so we report kind of basic information to Social Security Administration every month for that purpose. So technically, if you are speaking to somebody from the Social Security Administration, they aren't allowed to ask you questions about what's in your ABLE account. It is a really good idea to let them know, yes, I have an ABLE account or my child has an ABLE account, but they're not allowed to ask questions about what's in it. They can ask questions about withdrawals that are taken from it and maybe put into your regular bank account, and they can ask some basic questions around that, but not about what's in the account.
So we've touched a lot of high-level stuff so far, but can you give us an example of how someone might use an ABLE account, or maybe some common...
Yeah, we've got a wide range. The awesome thing about ABLE accounts is that they've really opened the door for people who, have had that door locked shut for them for so many years, right? If you think about it, if you could never save more than $2,000 in an account, you can't take vacations, you can't really buy a car, you can't buy a house, you can't buy really expensive, maybe assistive devices. So these accounts really open the doors for people in a lot of ways. Everything that I just said, I think if you ever speak to a parent, maybe 10, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, if you had talked to a parent who had a child that was born with a disability, they were told from the very beginning, do never save money for your child under their name because they will not be eligible for benefits when the time comes, right? So now parents can save on behalf of their children. And, just like parents who's put money into a college savings account, if you know that your child has a disability and that they're going to need money when they reach their transition years, right? Transitioning from childhood to adulthood, they're going to need money to put money down as a down payment on a home, or even to help support with assisted living if that's the case. So these accounts really open up a lot of possibilities for people who are living with disabilities that they just weren't able to achieve before.
I love that. And especially because, like you said, the person with the disability can be of any age when they open the account too.
Yep. It allows them to dream ahead and think about what they want to do in the future.
Yeah. And like you said, have more independence.
Yep.
That might tie to this next question that some people might think about is then what happens to an account when the person passes away, the beneficiary of the account passes away, assuming there's still a balance left in that account?
Yeah. So if there are funds left in the account after the beneficiary passes away, one of the first things that, of course, the people who are supporting them might think about is how to pay for funeral or burial costs. So those are all considered qualified disability expenses. And even though the beneficiary passed away, it's, on behalf of the beneficiary. So those can be paid for, and any other expenses that might have been paid for prior to that. As long as those all go through and they're qualified, those would clear. If the beneficiary has a qualifying sibling, qualifying meaning that they also have a disability, then the money could pass to an account for that sibling, whether an account's already open or, they open an account at that point for a sibling. If there isn't a successor beneficiary, then the money would go back to the beneficiary's estate. And at that point, it could be open to being recovered by Medicaid. So if Medicaid paid for any services on behalf of the beneficiary in their lifetime, then Medicaid might recover the funds from the person's estate. We've only really heard of one situation, or I've only ever heard of one situation where that happened, where Medicaid did recover money from the person's estate. So it could happen, although it's not very common. And I'll add that we have a national network called the Able Savings Plan Network. So ASPN is the acronym there. They're working on creating some legislation that will make ABLE accounts and any funds that transfer to an estate from an ABLE account exempt from Medicaid recovery. So I know that is a concern for some people who are looking into this, but we're working on making that not possible in the future.
And if someone's thinking about opening this account, is there a good time of year to do this, or does it really not matter, like if it's around tax time?
I mean, really what we say is if you meet the eligibility criteria and you're thinking about opening an ABLE account, just go ahead and do it. It really doesn't matter what time of year it is. As long as you meet that eligibility criteria, you can open it at any time. And the reason for that is, especially if you're a parent and you have a child with a disability and you're kind of uncertain if they're maybe like in my situation, my nephew has autism. He's highly functional. It can work on his own, may not need as severe supports as some people do, but I don't know what his future holds, right? And there's a lot of parents who are in that kind of situation where they don't know what's going to be possible until that time comes. Open an ABLE account, just add a little bit of money every month or whenever you can, and that way you have it there. And the reason I say that is because you have money set aside for them for the future, and they reach the, age of 18 and they become eligible for SSI, for instance. If there's $10,000 sitting or $5,000 sitting in a savings account out there, they won't be eligible to start receiving benefits. So put it in the ABLE account now and kind of cross that bridge when you come to it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Is there anything else a person should consider when they're opening an ABLE account?
Yeah. So if I think, as I mentioned before, only one account is allowed per beneficiary. There's a short window of time that the IRS will allow in the case of a rollover, as I mentioned before, if they're moving from one state to another or one plan to another. There's a 60-day rollover period there. Another thing is if you withdraw money, this is specifically pertaining to rent or housing payments. Again, SSI looks at the calendar month, right? So they're looking at the first of the month through the very last day of the month. If you withdraw funds from one month and you hold them into the next month, although it counts as a withdrawal in the first month, it could count as an asset in the second month. So for people who are withdrawing money for, rent payments or mortgage payments, we kind of recommend talk to your landlord or your mortgage company and just see if you can make that payment, by the 5th or the 10th of the month. And that allows enough time for deposits to be received, transfers to be made, and those payments to be made. And then the only other thing, which I don't think I've mentioned yet, is that if funds are used for non-qualified disability expenses, there may be a 10% penalty on that purchase, and then any taxes could be owed on the expenditure amount. Again, we haven't really come across that issue, but just be aware of that.
Okay. And then, Katie, what would you recommend for people who might already have another financial tool, like a special needs trust?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I have a lot of people who say, oh, I already have a special needs trust, or as I mentioned, I oversee that Developmental Disabilities Endowment Trust Fund. And we actually have a lot of people who have both a DD ETF and an ABLE account because they complement each other really, really well. And they have similar purposes, but different kind of benefits as far as how they're structured. So again, ABLE has contribution limits, right? Those annual contribution limits and maximum balance limits, whereas special needs trusts typically don't have those contribution limits or maximum balance limits. So we recommend people use like an ABLE account to make smaller deposits. But if you have a larger deposit like inheritance or a settlement, put that into a special needs trust. So another thing is that some people, depending on the way the special needs trust is set up, you might not be able to make regular, like basic living expenses or housing payments out of a special needs trust. So an ABLE account is really helpful in that way. It's more easily accessible. It's like make a transfer to your bank account or, swipe your prepaid card and you can have that be immediate. The special needs trusts typically, again, allow for more than that $500,000 balance in an ABLE account. You can usually put more than that into a special needs trust. And the special needs trusts usually don't have that $100,000 limit where if it reaches that balance, if you have SSI, if it reaches $100,000 in an ABLE account, anything over counts as an asset. But in a special needs trust, it doesn't count as an asset. So great accounts to use in a complementary way.
I love it. That's awesome.
So, Katie, could you tell us a little bit more about these developmental disability endowment trust funds, the DDETF? I'm going to struggle with that acronym. Could you just share a little bit more about what those mean for people, since it's probably not a term people are familiar with?
Yeah, you're not the only one to struggle with the DDETF. It is a mouthful. So that is a pooled special needs trust. And I believe that Washington State is one of the few, if not the only state that has a state-run special needs trust like this one. There's other states that have it, but they're not run by the state or administered by the state. And again, many similarities to ABLE, as I mentioned. The funds must be used on behalf of the beneficiary. It allows any funds that are in that account to be exempt from the $2,000 asset limit. They have to qualify or use the account for qualified disability expenses, much like in the ABLE account. So there's kind of a set of criteria for how they can use the account in DDETF as well. But there's some differences as well. So DDETF is solely for people who have either a developmental or an intellectual disability. So in that case, their eligibility criteria is they had to have been born with it or developed it very early, right? So the age of onset had to have happened before the age of 18 with the DDETF versus 26 with an ABLE account. The enrollments for the DDETF are done through the trust manager, who's the ARC of Washington. They manage the trust on behalf of the state of Washington. So all enrollments are done through them, and it's done by paper. So there's legal documents required, joinders and agreements and things like that to be signed. So all of that's done through the ARC of Washington as a trust manager, whereas with ABLE, it's all done online. And with the DDETF, there are two types of trusts that are available. So with ABLE, you can only have one account per beneficiary. The DDETF has two different types of trusts. One of them is a first-party trust. So it's a trust in the name of the beneficiary and can only take the beneficiary's own money. So that could be employment income, it could be settlement income, but anything that is the beneficiary's own money. The second type of trust we have is a third-party trust. And one beneficiary can have multiple third-party trusts. And it's really, anyone who wants to set up money on behalf of the beneficiary to contribute to them, could be a parent, a grandparent, a friend, community. They could all set up a trust on behalf of a beneficiary. And that is all third-party money, right? Anything that's not the beneficiary's own money. Let me see if there's any other notes I have about that. So I will say one benefit of opening up a DDETF for anybody who might have been thinking about like a special needs trust. If you or the person that you're looking for this for qualifies for a DDETF, there's significant cost savings to opening a DDETF over opening a regular special needs trust. Special needs trusts are legal financial vehicles. They can be quite cost prohibitive for people who simply can't afford it. And so the DDETF has much more reasonable costs. And then on top of that, at the moment, the state is currently matching most of the fees that a person might pay for the DDETF. So that makes it even more accessible for people.
Great. Yeah, you've obviously shared a lot of information today, but could you give us a quick summary, maybe kind of your elevator pitch that you give about the ABLE program?
Yeah, I think, the ABLE program is for everyone, and open an account. If you're even thinking about it, just take the plunge. It's super easy to open. It's all done online. It's super easy to access your funds and navigate. It only provides benefits to people. If anybody is ever out there having, they've been told by somebody from DDA or Social Security Administration information that they're not hearing, that may conflict with what I'm saying, we even have information on our website where you can pull up actual legal statutes and WACs that say, yes, this is how it's supposed to function and operate. So yeah, bottom line is open an ABLE account. If you meet the eligibility criteria, just do it.
And Katie, where can a person go to learn more about these accounts or actually sign up for one?
Yeah, everything is done online. So our website is www.washingtonstateable.com, and ton of information on our website, lots of resources. There's some presentations. If you're a community partner and you want to share this information with the people that you work with, lots of presentations and materials and FAQs on there. So at the top of our website, there's a button that says open an account, and that will kind of launch you into the process. There's some details to provide about the beneficiary, but you can have an account open in 10 minutes or less. You start an account with as little as $25 and you're good to go.
Great. Well, this is obviously a fantastic program. And since it is pretty new, is there any way that we can help get the word out about this ABLE program?
Yeah, I think, first of all, again, thank you for having me on the podcast. We're always excited to share about this. And we know it's just like anything, right? It might take people a few times of hearing about it and learning about it before they actually do it. So this is another opportunity to do that. And I appreciate that. Another great way, obviously, word of mouth. So if you have an ABLE account, share it with people who you know who might be interested or eligible. But one key thing that we're trying to work on these days is getting employers to offer ABLE accounts as just information in their kind of benefits onboarding or even at open enrollment. We heard one employer refer to it as the best free benefit they could offer, right? Because it really is. It doesn't have any cost to the employer. You just add a link maybe into the Benefits 24/7 portal and just have it available there for people to go and learn more about. So yeah, if you're an employer, either a state employer or otherwise, or if you are an employee and want to learn, have your agency offer this in their benefits portal, please share this podcast. Get the word out.
That's great. I know we have a lot of employers who listen to the podcast, school districts and local governments as well. So hopefully they can share with their colleagues and share with other organizations.
Or anyone who is general business owner. This applies to anyone in Washington State. You don't have to be a state worker.
That's a really good point.
Yep.
All right, Katie, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, this is fantastic information. I love this program and happy to get the word out.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been great to share, and please reach out if you have any questions.
Yeah, will do. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, and now we'd love to hear from you. What topics would you like to hear about? What questions do you have for us? Send an email to drs.podcasts@drs.wa.gov. That's drspodcasts@drs.wa.gov. The Department of Retirement Systems provides this podcast as a public service, but it's neither a legal interpretation nor a statement of DRS policy. References to any specific product or entity do not constitute an endorsement or recommendation. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by DRS employees are those of the employees and do not necessarily reflect the view of DRS or any of its officials.